He looked me in the eye, raised his glass like it was a toast, and publicly divorced me. In front of 300 guests, at the most prestigious gala of the year, with his new woman, Genevieve Sinclair, standing inches from him, her hand resting on his chest like she already won. The cameras didn't even flinch. They kept rolling as my world split open. Not backstage, not in a boardroom, but right under chandeliers and champagne towers, while the string quartet played our wedding song. But what none of them knew, not Charles, not Genevieve, not the press salivating for headlines, was that I was carrying his heir, the only one legally entitled to inherit the Davenport empire. And tonight wasn't the end. It was the trigger, because when you publicly humiliate a black woman who built herself from nothing, you'd better pray she stays silent. I didn't. I didn't break that night. Not because I was strong, but because I've been surviving far worse, for far longer. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in Newark. My mom turned our living room into a hair salon. Clients came in and out. I studied at the kitchen sink. Every time someone booked a late appointment, I gave up my bed without question. They called her Miss D. They never asked what the D stood for. No one ever thought she had a name worth knowing. We didn't have space, we didn't have quiet, but we had rules. And the first one she taught me was this: you don't wait for the world to make room. You carve it out yourself. Back then, I thought she was just tired. Now I know. She was training me for rooms like the one he tried to bury me in. I was 16 when I told my guidance counselor I wanted to apply to Harvard. She didn't even look up at first. Just flipped through my file, then smiled. Not unkind, but full of quiet disbelief. "That's a stretch, honey." I nodded, like I agreed. Then walked home in silence. My mom was braiding someone's hair in the kitchen. I didn't say a word. I just went to the bedroom, sat on the floor, and pulled out a yellow sticky note. I am not a stretch. I'm the future. I stuck it to the wall above my mattress, then another, and another, until the whole corner glowed in paper and ink. That night, I studied with the sound of scissors clipping and the smell of pressing oil in the air. No tutor, no prep course, just belief, and the beginning of a war I would learn to fight with books, silence, and grit. The envelope came on a Friday. Thin, cream-colored, Harvard's crest stamped in the corner. I opened it alone, standing in the hallway, hands shaking, knees locked. Full ride. No loans, no questions. Just, "Welcome to the class of 20XX. I walked into the kitchen. My mom didn't look up. She was rinsing combs in a plastic bowl. I slid the letter across the counter. She read it once, then again, then reached over and held my hand. No words, just that. I never told the counselor. I didn't need to. Instead, I mailed a white card back to her office. No return address, no note. Just 3 words, written in blue ink. I got in. Sometimes the loudest things I ever said were the ones I never spoke. I met Charles at an education summit in Boston. I was the youngest panelist. He was the keynote donor, billionaire, polished, impossible to miss. After my session, he approached me in the hallway, tilted his head and said, "You're not like the others." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Now I hear it differently. But back then, I smiled, because no one had ever looked at me like that in a room full of suits and pedigrees. We grabbed coffee after the closing session. What was supposed to be 20 minutes turned into 4 hours. We didn't talk about money, we talked about justice, about kids in underfunded schools, about policy changes that never made it to real classrooms. I told him I wanted to build something that didn't need legacy approval. He said, "You might just be the first woman I've met who makes me feel like power isn't enough." That night, I looked at him and thought, maybe love and purpose didn't have to cancel each other out. Maybe I didn't have to choose between a cause and a heart. I didn't know yet how wrong I'd be. He looked me in the eye, raised his glass like it was a toast, and publicly divorced me. In front of 300 guests, at the most prestigious gala of the year, with his new woman, Genevieve Sinclair, standing inches from him, her hand resting on his chest like she already won. The cameras didn't even flinch. They kept rolling as my world split open. Not backstage, not in a boardroom, but right under chandeliers and champagne towers, while the string quartet played our wedding song. But what none of them knew, not Charles, not Genevieve, not the press salivating for headlines, was that I was carrying his heir, the only one legally entitled to inherit the Davenport empire. And tonight wasn't the end. It was the trigger, Because when you publicly humiliate a black woman who built herself from nothing, you'd better pray she stays silent. I didn't. I didn't break that night, not because I was strong, but because I've been surviving far worse, for far longer. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in Newark. My mom turned our living room into a hair salon. Clients came in and out. I studied at the kitchen sink. Every time someone booked a late appointment, I gave up my bed without question. They called her Miss D. They never asked what the D stood for. No one ever thought she had a name worth knowing. We didn't have space, we didn't have quiet, but we had rules. And the first one she taught me was this: you don't wait for the world to make room. You carve it out yourself. Back then, I thought she was just tired. Now I know. She was training me for rooms like the one he tried to bury me in. I was 16 when I told my guidance counselor I wanted to apply to Harvard. She didn't even look up at first, just flipped through my file, then smiled, not unkind, but full of quiet disbelief. "That's a stretch, honey." I nodded, like I agreed, then walked home in silence. My mom was braiding someone's hair in the kitchen. I didn't say a word. I just went to the bedroom, sat on the floor, and pulled out a yellow sticky note. "I am not a stretch. I'm the future." I stuck it to the wall above my mattress, then another, and another, until the whole corner glowed in paper and ink. That night, I studied with the sound of scissors clipping and the smell of pressing oil in the air. No tutor, no prep course, just belief. And the beginning of a war I would learn to fight with books, silence, and grit. The envelope came on a Friday. Thin, cream-colored, Harvard's crest stamped in the corner. I opened it alone, standing in the hallway, hands shaking, knees locked. Full ride. No loans, no questions. Just, "Welcome to the class of 20XX. I walked into the kitchen. My mom didn't look up. She was rinsing combs in a plastic bowl. I slid the letter across the counter. She read it once, then again, then reached over and held my hand. No words, just that. I never told the counselor. I didn't need to. Instead, I mailed a white card back to her office. No return address, no note. Just 3 words, written in blue ink. I got in. Sometimes the loudest things I ever said were the ones I never spoke. I met Charles at an education summit in Boston. I was the youngest panelist. He was the keynote donor, billionaire, polished, impossible to miss. After my session, he approached me in the hallway, tilted his head, and said, "You're not like the others." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Now I hear it differently. But back then, I smiled, because no one had ever looked at me like that in a room full of suits and pedigrees. We grabbed coffee after the closing session. What was supposed to be 20 minutes turned into 4 hours. We didn't talk about money, we talked about justice, about kids in underfunded schools, about policy changes that never made it to real classrooms. I told him I wanted to build something that didn't need legacy approval. He said, "You might just be the first woman I've met who makes me feel like power isn't enough." That night, I looked at him and thought, maybe love and purpose didn't have to cancel each other out. Maybe I didn't have to choose between a cause and a heart. I didn't know yet how wrong I'd be. The engagement party was held at the Davenport estate. Stone pillars, hanging lights, hand-trimmed hedges that probably had their own gardener. I wore a navy dress, elegant, simple, respectful, the kind that didn't ask for too much attention. Guests floated around with champagne flutes and scripted smiles. Lawyers, diplomats, legacy families. I'd rehearsed every introduction, every handshake. When Charles walked me over to his mother, she greeted me with cold perfection. A handshake too light, a smile too short. Then, just as I turned away, I heard her lean toward a woman beside her and whisper, "He's always had a soft spot for charity cases." I didn't react. Not on the outside, but something in me cracked, small and sharp. I looked out across the garden. A group of children were playing by the fountain. Blonde hair, pink cheeks, dressed in linen and lace. I caught my reflection in the window behind them, the only dark face in a sea of soft pastels, the only body that didn't quite blend. In that moment, I didn't feel chosen. I felt studied, held up like a progressive statement, until I became inconvenient. I learned to play golf, not because I enjoyed it, but because that's where the real conversations happened, on manicured greens, between sips of imported scotch, while deals were whispered between swings. I changed my hair, less curl, less volume, something smoother, softer. Professional, they called it. I stopped pitching the bold projects, the ones about undocumented kids, language equity, prison reform. Too risky, they said. Too loud. So I quieted myself, smiled in meetings, nodded when I wanted to speak. Shrunk without shrinking. At the next fundraiser, someone told me I had such a clean aesthetic. I said thank you, even though I didn't know what they meant, even though I think they did. That night, I opened my journal and wrote just one line. Fitting in is exhausting. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because I finally admitted it, even to myself. And I knew, deep down, I could only keep pretending for so long before something in me would start to disappear. The boardroom smelled like lavender and old money. I presented a new initiative, education access for refugee children, a real plan, well-researched, scalable, timely. When I finished, silence. No questions, no pushback, just silence. Then Genevieve spoke. A few soft suggestions about rebranding the annual gala. They nodded, smiled, took notes. I sat there, blinking, not angry, just slowly realizing what was happening. After the meeting, I opened my inbox. One thread had been forwarded by mistake, an internal email chain. My name mentioned once. She's too intense for this brand. Let's lean into someone more aligned with our tone. No signature. No one owned the words. I stared at the screen, not shocked, just tired. That was the day I stopped confusing silence with support. They weren't ignoring me by accident. They were ghosting me in broad daylight, and I understood. My ideas weren't the problem. My presence was. I spent 2 months building it. A multilingual program for immigrant kids. Flexible classrooms, trauma-informed counselors, tools to help them feel seen, not just seated. I printed every page, clipped the corners, and placed it beside his morning coffee, eyes full of hope. Charles flipped through 3 pages, maybe 4. Then he set it down and sipped his espresso. "This is cute," he said, "but exhausting. Why not just donate? It's faster." I didn't answer right away, because I couldn't. Not from the place I was sitting, not while trying to protect the last shred of belief that love still respected who I was. He looked at me and smiled, like he was solving a problem. "You don't have to push this hard anymore. I've got it covered." But I didn't want to be covered. I wanted to be heard. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. To him, my purpose was just a project, and passion, if it couldn't scale, was simply a waste of time. The press release went out at 8:03 a.m. Genevieve Sinclair, new strategic advisor and official spokesperson for the Davenport Foundation. No warning, no meeting, no goodbye. The same initiative I built, the team I trained, now tied neatly under her name like I'd never existed. I stared at the screen, waiting for an explanation that never came. Instead, I got a text from Margaret. "Some voices," she wrote, "are simply easier on the ear." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of them were quiet enough to fit the world I'd been pushed into. They wanted soft, they wanted palatable, they wanted my voice without my truth. And Genevieve? She fit the image. Lighter, smoother, easier to frame. The worst part wasn't that they replaced me, it's that they expected me to stay quiet about it, as if I should be grateful just to have ever been allowed in the room. But I knew then. I wasn't losing a title. I was watching a system strip me of the one thing it never truly accepted, my presence. His laptop was left open. I wasn't snooping. I was setting down my tea when the screen lit up. Subject line, "Still thinking about last night?" From Genevieve Sinclair. I scrolled to the bottom, just one line. "I miss you already." That was enough. No need to see attachments, no need to ask. I closed the lid, walked to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, took out my red nail polish remover, and wiped each finger clean, one stroke at a time. No music, no crying, just silence thick enough to drown in, red flakes on cotton, like I was erasing a woman I no longer recognized. Not the public face, not the polished wife, just me, alone, stripped. And maybe that hurt more than the betrayal, realizing how far I'd drifted from the girl with yellow sticky notes on her wall. Have you ever stopped mid-breath and thought, how did I even get here? If you've ever had to peel off a version of yourself just to feel something real again, comment, "I've been there." You're not alone. I walked into the boardroom 5 minutes early. Claire was already there, my closest friend in the foundation, The one who once helped me rewrite my first grant proposal, who danced barefoot with me in the rain after our first big win. She saw me, and looked away, pretended to shuffle papers, checked her phone like she didn't just feel my presence cross the room. I waited, hoped, but she never met my eyes. That hit harder than the emails, harder than Genevieve. Because systems push you out loud, but friends let you go quietly. And I realized something in that sterile, overpriced meeting room. I was no longer in the right circle, not polished enough, not quiet enough, not white enough, not easy. The worst kind of exile isn't when they tell you to leave, it's when they stop seeing you altogether. I didn't cry, didn't make a scene. I just sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote, "They loved me when I was convenient." Have you ever lost to someone not because they changed, but because you didn't shrink fast enough? Comment, I felt that. Because the loneliest place is where you're no longer invited, but still expected to smile. The headline hit my screen before the coffee even finished brewing. Wife out, blonde in. No byline, no context, just two images side by side. Me, eyes cast down outside a gala. Her, radiant, stepping out of a black car like she'd always belonged there. It wasn't the words that hurt, it was the framing. Like I had been replaced, not divorced. Like love was a PR problem that had already been solved. I went to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wore a neutral-toned dress, straight hair, soft eyeshadow, and a hollow kind of elegance. She looked perfect. She didn't look like me. I placed a hand on the glass, not to fix anything, but to search for the girl who once scribbled sticky notes on a chipped bedroom wall. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice came through, steady and low, the way it always was when she was saving me without saying it. "Come home, Naomi. Even thorns have roots." And just like that, I remembered, you can survive being unloved by the world, but you can't survive forgetting who you are. She invited me to the sunroom at the back of the estate. No lawyers, no Charles, just the two of us, facing each other across a table too clean to belong to real conversation. The curtains were drawn halfway, like even the sunlight wasn't allowed to see everything. She poured the tea herself, measured, delicate, ritualistic, then placed the cup in front of me like a peace offering wrapped in porcelain. "I trust you'll handle this transition quietly," she said, with a smile polished enough to hide the demand. "You'll be taken care of, generously. Just don't make this messy or public." It wasn't a request. It was a command in pearls and polite tone. A transaction masked as tradition. And for a second I think she truly believed I would nod, thank her, and disappear. Instead, I met her eyes and answered, not with anger, but with something sharper. "Silence is not peace." Her face didn't move, but I saw it. The tiniest flinch. The realization that I wasn't going quietly. Not now, not ever. The bathroom was the only place that felt real. No staff, no cameras, no curated grace. Just tile floors, warm steam, and a silence heavy enough to hold me. I sat on the edge of the tub, knees pulled to my chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, like I was trying to hold myself together from the outside in. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just shook, quietly. Small tremors danced along my fingertips, like my body was mourning something before my mind had caught up. Then, from somewhere down the hall, came a sound. Soft jazz, a vinyl crackle, a song I hadn't heard in years. Mom used to play it on Sunday mornings while frying eggs, humming the melody between breaths. That song didn't belong in this house. But it found me. Each note curled into the room like a warm hand on the back of my neck. It didn't rescue me. But it reminded me I hadn't always lived inside this version of myself. I came from rhythm, from roots, from something real. And in that small, steamy room, wrapped in a song older than my shame, I let myself come undone, without apology. They didn't ask questions. They just showed up. Tracy came first, scrubs still on, a loose bun, and 2 paper bags filled with soup and cornbread from a diner I thought had closed years ago. She didn't say, "How are you?" She just placed the food on the counter, opened a window, and said, "You need air." Leah followed. Corporate sharpness softened by deep eyes that had seen too much. She brought a folder with passwords, paperwork, access codes, and quietly said, "Your accounts are yours again." She didn't explain how she did it. I didn't ask. June came last, holding a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. No words. She just handed it to me, and when I unwrapped it, I stopped breathing. It was me. But not the version they put on magazine covers, not the polished wife in cream suits. It was Naomi, with her natural curls, soft shadows under tired eyes, and lips that looked like they were holding back more truth than words. The room didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a ceremony, one without speeches or vows. Just women who'd bled and healed in silence, coming together to help me remember the shape of my own reflection. The screen glowed softly in the dim room. A blank post. A blinking cursor waiting, like it knew the words were heavier than usual. Naomi leaned over the desk, fingers hovering for a long moment before finally beginning to type. Dear bright daughters, this world won't hand you space, so you make your own. Don't ask for permission to speak. Don't shrink to be digestible. Don't trade your fire for approval. They'll call you too loud, too much, too hard to manage. Smile anyway. Then build something so big they have to look up to see it. She sat back, read it once, didn't change a word. Then she clicked publish. No dramatic music, no notification bell, just a quiet release, like setting a match to a soaked rope and watching it dry into flame. Outside the window, the world moved on. A kid rode past on a bike. Someone laughed down the block. Sunlight hit the glass just right, and Naomi closed her eyes. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't noise. This was the first brick of something new. Not built for applause, but for the next girl who'd need a mirror that looked like her. The lights weren't blinding. They were warm, like truth had been waiting for her. Naomi stepped onto the stage at Howard University, her heels steady, her shoulders square. In front of her, rows of young black students, professors, mentors, and voices she once thought were unreachable. She didn't use a script. She didn't need one. She stood behind the podium, took a slow breath, and let it land. If they won't let us sit, we build new damn tables. The room erupted, not with polite claps, but with shouts, tears, hands pounding seats, and voices cracking from recognition. One student stood up, fists clenched, eyes full. That's my story too. That's when Naomi knew. This wasn't about reclaiming her name. It was about giving others a name they could wear with pride. By the time she stepped off stage, And Bright Daughters was trending. Her inbox flooded with messages, not from journalists, but from girls in dorm rooms, single mothers, teachers in underfunded schools, people who finally saw themselves reflected, not distorted. Naomi didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled because the story they tried to silence had just become a movement, and this time, no one could rewrite her. Naomi was reviewing scholarship essays in the library of a local youth center. A little girl sat beside her, wide-eyed, curious, pencil gripped tight. They were deep into college dreams and tuition talk when the room spun just slightly, not enough to panic, just enough to pause. Naomi blinked, steadying herself on the table, her breath short. She brushed it off, finished the session, and told herself it was stress, but something lingered. Later that afternoon, she sat in the quiet of a small clinic. Soft walls, muted posters, a clock ticking too loud. The doctor entered with a calm face and a clipboard. She didn't drag it out. You're 12 weeks in, she said gently. Strong heartbeat, healthy pregnancy. Naomi stared at her. No shock, no panic, just stillness, like her body had known before her mind had caught up. She looked down, her hand slowly pressing to her belly. A warmth bloomed from the inside out. A life, unplanned, unwelcome to some, but so deeply hers. She let out a breath, half laughter, half disbelief. The kind of exhale you give when you realize everything just changed, but you're finally strong enough to carry it. The Davenport estate boardroom smelled of leather and legacy. Long table, oil paintings, ice in glasses no one drank from. Eleanor stood at the head, fists planted. Her voice didn't shake. It sliced. That child is the only legitimate link to our legacy, she snapped. No one dared argue. Charles sat 2 seats away, jaw tight, thumb flicking his watch strap. He didn't look up, didn't speak until later, alone in his office, lights dimmed. That's when he dialed Naomi. Left a message, then another, then one more, shorter this time. Naomi, let's meet. For the baby's future, that's all I'm asking. But Naomi didn't answer. She read the transcript once. Then again, not because she didn't understand, but because the tone was clear. It wasn't love, it wasn't remorse, it was strategy, laced in sugar. For years he held the keys, money, name, access. Now, all of it hinged on the very life he tried to erase, and Naomi, she sat at her window, sipping tea, phone face down. For the first time, his power couldn't touch her because she no longer needed anything he had to offer. Naomi didn't call back. She filled out grant paperwork instead. The Rise and Bloom Foundation launched quietly. No press release, no champagne. Just a mission. Scholarships for black and brown girls who'd been told, not yet, not you, or not realistic. She filmed a short video at the community library. No filters, no makeup team, just Naomi in a soft cardigan sitting on the floor surrounded by a small circle of girls who looked like younger versions of her. She held a children's book in one hand, turned a page slowly, and smiled as they leaned closer. Her voice steady, warm. You were born bright, not broken. No matter what they say, your mind is not too much. Your dreams don't need permission. One girl rested her head on Naomi's knee. Another whispered, "Can I read next?" Naomi nodded. Within hours, the video spread. Shared from inbox to inbox, screen to screen. Hashtag Rise and Bloom began trending. But Naomi didn't care about the hashtag. She cared about the way one girl walked taller the next day. About the mothers who stopped her in line at the grocery store to say thank you without needing to explain why. She didn't clap back. She built forward. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Maybe it was the polished floors. Maybe it was the silence, thick as cement. Naomi sat with her mother beside her, both dressed in soft gray, calm but unshaken. Charles sat across the aisle, eyes down, hands clasped. His tie perfectly knotted, but his world unraveling. The judge didn't pause for drama. No gavel slam, no drawn-out speeches, just the ruling, clear and final. Ms. Ellison will retain full custody. Mr. Davenport is granted supervised visitation only, per court schedule. A subtle shift ran through the room. Not a gasp, not applause, just breath, finally exhaled. Naomi's mother reached over, her fingers wrapping tight around Naomi's hand. Naomi didn't look at Charles. She didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was relief. A quiet confirmation that truth, when nurtured long enough, blooms even in courtrooms. Outside, reporters waited. But Naomi didn't speak. She walked through them like fog, head high, arms empty, but heart full. She had no press statement, no need to justify, because the system that once ignored her voice had finally spoken back. And this time it said, "You're enough, and your child deserves more than a legacy bought by wealth." The gallery was softly lit, warm tones glowing against stark photographs of survival and hope. Naomi stepped through the entrance, her long coat draped open to reveal the curve of her pregnancy, visible, undeniable, and radiant in its truth. She moved with quiet certainty, unhurried, the sound of her heels gentle against polished floors. The room was filled with quiet murmurs, but they faded as her presence caught the edge of attention, one by one. She paused in front of a portrait, an image of a young girl reading by candlelight, eyes fierce with purpose. Naomi placed her hand on her belly, her smile touched with something deeper than pride, something like legacy, and then she felt him. Charles. He stood across the gallery, half-turned, watching her, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met, years, choices, and wounds packed into one single look. He shifted slightly, as if to move toward her, but Naomi didn't wait. She didn't raise a hand, didn't speak. Instead, she held his gaze, offered a nod, graceful, steady, complete. And then, just as gently, she turned away. Not out of dismissal, but release. Her steps carried her toward a group of young girls waiting near the exit, one of them holding a notebook, eyes wide with dreams. Power, she had learned, isn't loud. It's choosing who gets your silence. Naomi didn't look back after the gallery, but the echo of that moment, of meeting his eyes and walking away, lingered longer than expected. Not because of him, but because of how many people had once stood behind him, including Claire. Later that night, back home, Naomi sat with a blanket over her lap, a warm bottle cradled in her hand. Her inbox pinged. A message from Claire. "I thought I was protecting you. I'm sorry." Naomi read it twice. Once as the woman she used to be, the one who needed validation. Then again as who she had become. She closed her laptop gently. No bitterness, just enough. There would be no reply. Some apologies weren't bridges, they were walls wrapped in flowers. She stood up, walked into the living room and found Ava, one of her scholarship girls, curled up with a book, legs swinging off the edge of the couch. Naomi smiled, sat down, and handed her a glass of warm milk. Not every bond needed fixing. Some were never built to hold. But here, in this quiet home of new beginnings, Naomi chose presence over the past. She poured into the next generation what no one had ever poured into her. The hospital lights were soft, but everything else was sharp. Every breath, every contraction, every second stretching longer than the last. Naomi gripped the sheets with one hand, her mother's fingers wrapped tight around the other, sweat on her brow, tremor in her breath, and then a sound that cut through everything, a cry, full, fierce, alive. "It's a boy!" Naomi couldn't see through the tears now. The nurse laid him on her chest, tiny, warm, heartbeat racing. Her mother leaned in, brushing Naomi's forehead gently. "He has your eyes," she whispered, "and your fire." Naomi let go, of pain, of grief, of every sharp edge she'd carried for years. She wept, not from fear, not even from relief, but from the overwhelming truth. She had brought something into the world no one could take from her. A life, a legacy, a love that didn't ask to be proven. And in that sterile room, with monitors beeping and blankets folded and no cameras watching, Naomi felt more powerful than she ever had at a podium, a gala, or beside a billionaire. This wasn't just her son. This was the proof she was never the charity case. She was the root. He was the bloom. Charles sat on the cold bench outside the delivery room. His tailored suit looked out of place under the harsh hospital lights. His phone sat unused beside him. No buzzing reporters, no emails, no aides whispering updates. Just silence. He leaned forward, staring through the small glass window into the room beyond. Naomi was there, holding their newborn son. Her mother beside her. Nurses moving gently, quietly. But Charles wasn't part of it. Not a hand to hold. Not a name called. Not a door opened. He'd arrived hours ago, demanding entry like he always had. Through power, through presence, through persuasion. But Naomi had said nothing, simply gave the nurse a look, a firm, final nod. He wasn't allowed in. Now, he sat watching a moment he once believed he'd own. And for the first time, Charles Davenport had nothing to say. No speech to control the narrative, no wealth to buy a place in that room, just a pane of glass, and the slow, sinking realization. He wasn't outside a room, he was outside a life. The lavender in the backyard swayed gently, brushing against the fence like a memory too soft to hold. The sun dipped low, casting warm amber across the porch. Naomi stood barefoot on the steps, a chipped ceramic mug warm in her hands, steam curling toward the sky. Lena, now 17 and fierce, giggled as she pushed baby Micah in a bright blue plastic car. His laughter rang through the yard like wind chimes in the breeze, sharp and joyful. There were no velvet gowns, no flashbulbs, no curated guest lists, just grass, cracked pavement, and peace, deep, earned, and unshaken. Naomi watched Micah wobble out of the car and wrap his arms around Lena's leg. The girl looked down, smiled, and whispered something only he could hear. Naomi felt her chest swell, not with pride, but with the quiet fullness of a life that had healed in small, steady ways. She didn't need to reclaim the world that once tried to erase her. She had created something more powerful than recognition. She had grown a world of her own. Not inherited, not stolen, not given as a favor, but built, with grit, with scars, and with a love that no one could take away. The classroom was small, sunlight slipping through faded blinds, chalk dust floating like whispers. A group of third-grade girls sat cross-legged on the rug, eyes wide as their teacher handed out a worn paperback. At the front, a girl with tight braids and a spark in her voice stood tall and began to read. "I was never a stretch. I was the future." The room stilled. One girl pressed her hand to her chest. Another whispered, "That's me." Behind her, on the blackboard, written in pink chalk, Curriculum, Bright Daughters, Chapter 3. Naomi's sticky note, once hidden beside a rusted sink in a cramped apartment, had become a lesson plan, a movement, a mirror for girls who had only seen ceilings before. No more whispering brilliance in silence. No more apologizing for existing. Bright Daughters was no longer just a name. It was history printed in lesson books. It was Naomi's story, carried in backpacks, recited in classrooms, held in the hearts of children too often told to shrink. Legacy doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it sits on a folding chair, reads from a photocopied page, and says, "I belong here." The house was quiet, the kind of silence only night can bring. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, paper creased gently under her palm. A dim lamp hummed above, casting a soft circle of light. Micah slept in the hammock near the window, his chest rising in steady rhythm. The air smelled like lavender and wood polish. Outside, the wind rustled, but inside, peace held its breath. She began to write. "My son, you carry my fire, not my scars. What broke me doesn't belong to you. What built me does." Her hand paused, then continued. "One day, they may question your place. They might ask who gave you permission to dream big, to speak boldly, to take up space. Walk anyway. Walk like I did, barefoot, with purpose." A tear slid down, not out of sadness, but gratitude, for surviving long enough to leave a trail, a path not paved in bitterness, but light. She folded the letter gently, not for today, not even for tomorrow, but for the moment when Micah would need to remember who he came from, a woman who was once told she was too much and chose to be more. If this story reminded you of your own, if you've ever been told you were asking for too much, dreaming too loud, standing too tall, yet you kept rising anyway, if you've ever rebuilt from the silence they left you in, if you chose to walk barefoot toward a future they said wasn't yours, comment below, "I rose." Because fire never burns the ones who learn to become the flame. And if someone you love is still in the dark, still doubting whether her voice matters, send this to her. Let her hear it from someone who's walked through the same heat. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror. It's a map. It's a reminder that you were never too much. You were just born bright. Like this story? Share it. Still rising? Subscribe. Bright daughters rise louder when we rise together.